In the depths of the Pacific, amidst darkness and destruction, Chester Bennington and his crew faced their greatest challenge: survival. But the Japanese assault was only the beginning. Witness how a simple mission turned into a desperate fight for life.
Chester Bennington was not the type of man easily shaken. Born and raised in a small town in Ohio, he grew up with the steady rhythm of the Great Lakes, where his father worked as a fisherman. The vastness of the water, the unpredictability of the weather, and the demands of hard labor had shaped him from a young age. By the time he reached adulthood, Chester had developed a quiet resilience and a deep respect for the sea. When World War II broke out, Chester, like many young men of his generation, felt a sense of duty to serve his country. He enlisted in the United States Navy, bringing with him the knowledge of the water and a calm demeanor that made him a natural sailor. After basic training, he was assigned to a destroyer, the USS Anderson, a vessel tasked with patrolling the treacherous waters of the Pacific Ocean. Chester's role on the ship was crucial. As a bosun's mate, he was responsible for the maintenance of the ship and its equipment, ensuring everything was in perfect working order. He took pride in his work, knowing that the safety of the crew depended on the ship's condition. The USS Anderson was not just a warship, it was a lifeline in the vast, unpredictable ocean. Life aboard the USS Anderson was demanding but filled with a sense of camaraderie that Chester cherished. The crew was a diverse group, hailing from different parts of the United States, each with their own stories, dreams, and fears. Despite the harsh conditions, they had formed a bond that could only be forged through shared hardships. They ate together, worked together, and faced the ever-present threat of enemy submarines together. Chester had a reputation among his shipmates as a steady hand and a reliable friend. His calm presence was a source of comfort during the long, lonely nights at sea when the men would gather on deck, sharing cigarettes and stories of home. He listened more than he spoke, offering a quiet word of encouragement when needed, or a steady gaze that conveyed a sense of unspoken solidarity. But beneath the surface, Chester carried the same fears and anxieties as the rest of the crew. The war had a way of making even the most resilient souls question their fate. Every time the ship set out on a new mission, the uncertainty of survival weighed heavily on everyone's minds. The Japanese submarines that prowled the Pacific waters were a constant threat. Their presence felt even in the stillness of the night. Despite the dangers, the crew of the USS Anderson maintained a sense of purpose and resolve. They knew the stakes were high, and they relied on each other to keep going, day after day. Chester, with his quiet strength and unwavering dedication, became an integral part of this close-knit group. Together, they navigated the challenges of war, finding moments of solace in each other's company, even as the world around them was engulfed in chaos. Little did Chester know, his resilience and the bond he shared with his shipmates would soon be tested in ways he could never have imagined. The sea, which he had always respected but never feared, was about to become a battlefield where survival would depend not just on skill, but on the strength of the human spirit. The USS Anderson sliced through the waters of the Pacific, its powerful engines churning the waves into white foam. The sky above was a vast expanse of blue, the sun blazing down on the deck. But despite the clear weather, there was a heavy sense of unease among the crew. The destroyer had been given orders to patrol a particularly treacherous stretch of ocean, an area known for its lurking dangers. This was a region where the calm surface belied the deadly threats below, a hunting ground for Japanese submarines. Chester Bennington stood on the deck, his gaze fixed on the horizon, scanning for any signs of trouble. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, a deceptive paradise hiding the perils beneath. The crew had been briefed on the mission. They were to scout the waters, protect the fleet, and engage the enemy if necessary. It was a routine task, one they had performed many times before, but this time felt different. The ship's officers were more tense than usual, their faces etched with concern. Word had spread among the crew that several ships had gone missing in these waters in recent weeks, victims of the silent, invisible predators that stalk the depths. The thought of being targeted by a submarine, of hearing the ominous whine of a torpedo slicing through the water, sent a chill down Chester's spine. As the day wore on, the mood aboard the USS Anderson grew increasingly somber. The usual banter and laughter among the sailors had given way to nervous glances and whispered conversations. Chester could feel the tension in the air, as palpable as the salt spray from the ocean. He wasn't the only one who sensed it. His shipmates moved with the kind of forced nonchalance, their eyes darting to the water's edge as if expecting danger to materialize at any moment. In the ship's mess hall, the usual lively chatter was replaced by quiet discussions, voices hushed as the crew spoke of the risks they faced. Chester joined his friends at a table, where they picked at their food without much appetite. The topic of conversation was the same everywhere: the Japanese submarines. They were out there, somewhere, silent and deadly, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Think we'll see any action today?" one of the sailors, a young man from Texas named Billy, asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Chester shrugged, not wanting to add to the growing sense of dread. "We're always ready for it," he said, though he knew that readiness didn't make the danger any less real. He could see the fear in Billy's eyes, a reflection of what he felt himself. They were all thinking the same thing. What if today was the day they didn't make it back? The ship's captain, a stern but fair man named Captain Harris, made regular rounds to check on his crew, offering words of encouragement. He was a seasoned veteran, having seen his share of battles, but even he couldn't hide the concern in his eyes as he reviewed the maps and coordinates. The waters they were entering were known to be heavily patrolled by the enemy, and their mission was a dangerous one. As evening approached, the sky began to darken, the brilliant blue fading into shades of orange and purple. The USS Anderson continued its patrol, the crew on high alert. Chester returned to his post, his senses heightened, every splash of water or creak of the ship's hull setting his nerves on edge. The radio operator reported increased enemy activity in the area, confirming what they had all feared. Chester's hands tightened on the railing as he scanned the horizon once more. The calm surface of the ocean seemed almost mocking, as if daring them to let their guard down. But Chester knew better. He had seen too much already to trust the ocean's placid facade. Beneath the still waters, danger lurked, unseen and unpredictable. Night fell, casting long shadows over the deck. The ship's lights were dimmed to avoid detection, and the crew moved with quiet efficiency, each man performing his duties with a sense of urgency. Chester could feel the tension building, the silence growing heavier with each passing minute. It was as if the entire ship was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. And then, in the stillness of the night, a sound that sent a jolt of fear through every man on board: the distant, unmistakable hum of a torpedo in the water. The moon hung high over the Pacific, casting a silver sheen on the water's surface as the USS Anderson sailed through the darkened sea. The calm of the night was deceptive, masking the latent dangers that lurked beneath the waves. The crew, exhausted from the day's tension, had settled into a false sense of security, their nerves frayed, but temporarily soothed by the quiet. Chester Bennington was on watch, his eyes scanning the horizon with the same vigilance he had maintained for days. But tonight, the ocean seemed oddly serene. Without warning, the tranquility was shattered. The deep, resonant thud of an explosion echoed through the night, reverberating through the ship's steel hull. Chester's heart leapt into his throat as the USS Anderson jolted violently, the ship lurching to one side. The sudden, fear shaking threw him off balance, and he barely managed to grab hold of a railing to steady himself. The ship's lights flickered and went out, plunging the deck into darkness. The deafening roar of the second explosion followed quickly, this time closer, and a blinding flash illuminated the night sky as flames erupted from the starboard side. The hull groaned in protest as the vessel was struck again and again, each explosion sending shockwaves through the ship. Chester scrambled to his feet, his mind racing to process the chaos unfolding around him. Panic spread like wildfire among the crew as they were jolted from their beds. Men scrambled to their stations, their faces pale with fear, but resolute. Chester ran to the deck, where he found himself in the midst of a frantic scramble. The once orderly ship was now a maelstrom of shouting voices, clanging metal, and the acrid stench of smoke and burning oil. The piercing sound of the general alarm blared, a relentless shriek that seemed to underscore the urgency of their situation. On the deck, the crew rushed to man their battle stations, their movements frantic and disorganized. Chester grabbed a fire extinguisher and fought his way through the thickening smoke, desperately trying to put out the fires that were spreading across the deck. The ship's gunners, some of whom had been thrown from their positions, were struggling to regain control of their stations, firing blindly into the dark waters where the enemy submarine was believed to be lurking. The ship's captain, Captain Harris, bellowed orders through the din, his voice firm but strained. "Man the guns. Prepare to return fire. All hands below decks. Secure the bulkheads." His commands cut through the chaos, a beacon of authority in the pandemonium. Chester followed the orders, his heart pounding as he raced to the bridge where the captain was coordinating the counterattack. Chester could see the damage from the bridge window. The USS Anderson was listing heavily, smoke billowing from the damaged sections, and the sound of the sea pouring in through the breached hull was deafening. The crew fought to stabilize the ship, closing off watertight compartments to prevent further flooding. The relentless barrage of torpedoes from the Japanese submarine continued, each explosion sending tremors through the ship's frame. In the midst of the chaos, Chester caught sight of a young sailor, Billy, who was struggling to handle the fire hoses. Chester dashed over, helping him steady the hose and directing the water towards the spreading flames. "Keep it steady," Chester shouted over the roar of the flames. "We need to get this under control." As they worked together, Chester could hear the frantic shouts of his comrades, the cries of injured men, and the agonized groans of the ship itself. The crew's training and bravery were put to the ultimate test as they fought to repel the assault and save their vessel. The battle seemed to stretch on for an eternity, each minute marked by explosions and the unrelenting pressure of the enemy's attacks. Despite their valiant efforts, the USS Anderson was suffering. Chester could see the determination in his shipmates' eyes, their resolve to fight back and survive even as the ship's fate hung in the balance. Finally, after what felt like hours, the sound of enemy fire began to dwindle. The submarine, having inflicted its damage, retreated into the depths, leaving the USS Anderson battered but still afloat. Exhausted and covered in soot, Chester and the crew took a moment to assess the damage and count their losses. The deck was a scene of devastation: burnt and twisted metal, scattered equipment, and the silent, somber presence of the fallen. Chester stood among the ruins, his heart heavy with the weight of the night's events. The battle had been fierce, but the ship and its crew had endured. The struggle for survival was far from over, but they had held their ground, proving their strength and resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity. The night sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, casting a pale light over the damaged ship. Chester looked out over the Pacific, the waters now calm but forever changed by the night's harrowing ordeal. The USS Anderson had survived the assault, but the true cost of the battle had yet to be fully realized. The USS Anderson was in critical condition. The relentless assault from the Japanese submarine had left the ship severely damaged, and the once proud destroyer now listed precariously to one side, its deck awash with seawater. The hull groaned under the strain, and the shrill wail of the distress alarms filled the air with an ominous sense of urgency. Chester Bennington stood on the bridge, his face etched with determination. The ship's situation had deteriorated rapidly. Smoke billowed from the wounded sections, and the water level was rising. There was no time to waste. He knew that staying aboard any longer would mean certain death. Chester had seen enough of the destruction and heard the despairing cries of the wounded. It was time to act. The order to abandon ship came through the loudspeaker, cutting through the chaos. Chester grabbed a life jacket from a nearby locker and quickly made his way to the deck. The crew, already in various stages of panic and disarray, were scrambling to get into the lifeboats. The sight of men shoving and pushing each other to reach the lifeboats was both heart-wrenching and frantic. Chester spotted a lifeboat that was almost ready for launch. He recognized some familiar faces among the sailors: Billy, the young Texan, Sam, the ship's cook, and a few others who were trying to help the injured. Chester called out to them, his voice barely audible over the roar of the sea and the crackle of fire. "Billy, Sam, over here," Chester shouted, waving them over. "We need to get off this ship now." Billy, his face pale and eyes wide with fear, stumbled over, clutching his life jacket. "Chester, what do we do? Help me with this lifeboat," Chester said, gripping the ropes and attempting to free the lifeboat from its restraints. The ship's deck was slanted at a dangerous angle, making every movement a challenge. The lifeboat's release mechanism was jammed, and Chester fought to loosen it as water began to pour over the sides of the ship. The crew worked together, some struggling to keep their balance, while others tried to calm the panicking sailors. Chester's hands were slick with sweat and seawater, and his heart raced as the ship continued to list further. The ship's lights flickered, casting eerie shadows over the scene of chaos. Finally, with a tremendous effort, Chester managed to free the lifeboat. He and the others quickly began to lower it into the water. The ropes creaked and groaned under the strain, and the lifeboat swayed dangerously as it descended. Chester could hear the ship's hull cracking and splintering, the sounds of the vessel succumbing to the ocean's unforgiving grip. With the lifeboat now afloat, Chester and the others scrambled aboard. The vessel bobbed unsteadily in the churning sea, and Chester helped to steady it as the crew climbed in. He could see the desperation in their eyes, the realization that they had survived the initial assault, but were now facing another peril, the vast, open ocean, with little hope of immediate rescue. As Chester looked back at the USS Anderson, it was clear that the ship was sinking fast. The once proud destroyer was now a dark silhouette against the burning horizon, its lights extinguished, its structure broken. The remaining crew on deck were abandoning ship, some leaping into the water, others clinging to debris. Chester felt a pang of sorrow for those who hadn't made it to the lifeboats. The lifeboat drifted away from the sinking ship, the cold sea spray stinging their faces as they watched the USS Anderson go down. The vessel gave one final shudder before disappearing beneath the waves, leaving only a trail of wreckage and debris. The survivors huddled together in the lifeboat, their faces illuminated by the dim light of the moon. The cold, salty water splashed around them, and the waves rocked their tiny craft. Chester took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic energy of his shipmates. He knew that their struggle was far from over. The ocean was a vast and unforgiving place, and they had to stay vigilant and hope for rescue. As the lifeboat floated in the open sea, the men began to regain some semblance of composure. Chester took charge, organizing their limited supplies and setting up a watch schedule. The night was long, and the silence of the ocean was punctuated only by the occasional splash and the distant sound of the ship's final moments beneath the waves. In the cold, dark hours of the early morning, Chester looked out over the empty expanse of the sea. The USS Anderson was gone, but the survivors in the lifeboat were still alive. They had escaped the sinking ship, but now, they faced the daunting challenge of survival at sea. With resolve in his heart, Chester vowed to lead his fellow sailors through the darkness, holding onto the hope that rescue would come before it was too late. The lifeboat bobbed gently on the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, its occupants huddled together, staring blankly at the endless horizon. The once lively crew of the USS Anderson, now reduced to a handful of survivors, had been thrust into a stark and frightening reality. The remnants of their ship, their home, were swallowed by the sea, leaving them adrift in a boundless, unforgiving ocean. Chester Bennington sat at the edge of the lifeboat, his face illuminated by the pale light of the early dawn. His mind was numb, struggling to process the enormity of their situation. Around him, the other survivors were similarly stunned, their faces ashen and their eyes hollow. The chaos and urgency of the previous hours had given way to a disquieting stillness, broken only by the rhythmic lapping of the waves against the lifeboat. Billy, the young sailor Chester had helped into the lifeboat, sat hunched over, his shoulders shaking slightly. He was trying to steady his breath, but the tremors of shock were evident. Chester could see the same disbelief in the eyes of his shipmate Sam, the cook, who sat silently, staring into the distance, and a few others who had managed to find their way into the lifeboat amidst the pandemonium. They were all grappling with the reality that their ship was gone, and with it, a part of their lives and their identities. The lifeboat was small and cramped, with barely enough room for everyone to sit comfortably. The survivors were now faced with the reality of their situation. They were alone in the middle of the Pacific, with no immediate hope of rescue, and only the scant provisions they had managed to salvage from the ship. Chester took a deep breath, trying to clear the fog of disbelief that clouded his mind. He forced himself to focus on the practicalities of their predicament. "We need to stay calm," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "We've got to ration our supplies and keep a lookout for any ships or planes." His words were met with a mix of nods and vacant stares. The gravity of their situation was sinking in, and the initial shock was giving way to a haunting realization of their isolation. Chester looked around at his fellow survivors, their faces marked by a shared sense of loss and confusion. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became oppressive, and the small lifeboat began to feel even more confining. Chester tried to organize their meager supplies: a few cans of water, some hardtack, and a small fishing kit they had managed to retrieve. The task seemed almost absurd in the face of their vast surroundings, but it was a necessary distraction from the growing sense of hopelessness. Billy finally spoke, his voice cracking. Do you think anyone will come looking for us?" Chester met his gaze, forcing a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm sure they will. We've just got to hold on and keep ourselves together." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken fears and doubts. Chester could see the strain in his companion's eyes, the silent question of whether they would survive the days ahead. He knew that their physical survival depended on their mental fortitude as much as their rationing and navigation skills. As the day wore on, Chester took turns with the others, scanning the horizon for any signs of ships or aircraft. The ocean stretched out endlessly, a vast and indifferent expanse of blue that seemed to mock their small, fragile existence. The sense of isolation was profound, the reality of their situation settling in with a chilling finality. Despite their collective shock, Chester knew that he had to keep everyone focused. He gathered the survivors and started to organize a routine, keeping watch, rationing supplies, and attempting to stay hydrated. Every small task became a lifeline, a way to combat the overwhelming sense of helplessness that threatened to engulf them. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and the survivors huddled together for warmth. Chester lay back in the lifeboat, staring up at the stars that seemed so distant and indifferent. The vastness of the ocean, combined with the enormity of their loss, left him feeling small and insignificant. Yet, amidst the overwhelming despair, Chester held onto a flicker of hope, a belief that they would be rescued, that they would find their way back to safety. In the darkness, surrounded by the endless ocean, Chester and the survivors clung to each other in the hope that, despite the initial shock and disbelief, they would find the strength to endure the trials that lay ahead. The sun blazed relentlessly overhead, casting a harsh light on the small lifeboat bobbing in the vast, open sea. Chester Bennington and the other survivors were now fully immersed in the grim reality of their predicament. The initial shock of their ordeal had faded, replaced by a stark awareness of the challenges they faced. Chester and the others gathered around their limited supplies, which amounted to a small stockpile of provisions hastily salvaged from the sinking ship. A few cans of water, a small bag of hardtack, and a basic fishing kit were all they had. Chester took inventory, his expression serious as he assessed their situation. "We need to ration everything carefully," Chester said, his voice carrying a note of authority as he addressed the group. "We don't know how long we'll be out here, so every bit counts." Billy, still visibly shaken, looked at the sparse supplies with a mixture of disbelief and worry. "How long will this last us?" he asked, his voice trembling. Chester calculated quickly, trying to remain composed. "We've got enough water to last about a week if we ration it well. The hardtack will last longer, but it's not much of a meal. We'll have to catch more food." Sam, the ship's cook, nodded in agreement. "I can help with the fishing," he said, trying to sound optimistic despite the gravity of their situation. The survivors settled into a routine, though it was far from easy. Chester and Billy took turns on lookout duty, scanning the horizon for any signs of ships or aircraft. The intense heat during the day was oppressive, and the lack of shade made the small lifeboat feel like a furnace. As the temperature climbed, their thirst became unbearable, and the small sips of water they were able to ration did little to quench their growing thirst. In the meantime, Sam and another sailor, Mark, worked on the fishing kit, attempting to catch anything that might provide some sustenance. The process was slow and frustrating, with their initial attempts yielding nothing but a few small fish. The food they caught was barely enough to fill their stomachs, leaving them constantly hungry and weak. The exposure to the elements began to take its toll. The survivors' skin burned under the relentless sun, and their lips cracked from dehydration. Each night, as the temperature dropped, the small lifeboat felt like a freezing cage. Chester and the others huddled together for warmth, their bodies shivering as they tried to rest. Fear and anxiety began to set in. The vast, empty ocean seemed to stretch on forever, and the sense of isolation was overwhelming. At night, the darkness was complete, broken only by the occasional flicker of distant stars. The constant worry about their future gnawed at their spirits, and the fear of the unknown was a constant companion. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Chester gathered the survivors for a brief meeting. "We need to stay positive and focused," he said, trying to keep their morale up. "We've survived this far, and we'll keep fighting. Let's continue to ration our supplies, keep a lookout, and stay hopeful. We're stronger together." The survivors nodded, their faces reflecting a mixture of determination and exhaustion. Chester could see the strain in their eyes, but he also saw a flicker of resolve. They were in survival mode now, and every small victory, whether it was catching a fish or conserving water, became a source of hope. As the days passed, the physical and mental challenges of survival grew increasingly demanding. The lifeboat became a small, cramped world where every decision and every resource mattered. Chester and the others found solace in their shared struggle, drawing strength from one another as they faced the hardships of their situation. The ocean remained an endless, unyielding expanse, but Chester held onto the belief that rescue was possible. Each passing day was a test of endurance, and he knew that their survival depended on their ability to adapt and persevere. With every challenge they faced, Chester was determined to lead his fellow survivors through the darkness, holding onto the hope that they would find their way back to safety. The small lifeboat, now a fragile sanctuary adrift in the vast Pacific, had become a world unto itself. Chester Bennington and the survivors settled into a daily routine designed to manage their meager resources and sustain their dwindling energy. The rhythm of their new life was marked by the repetition of tasks and the constant battle against the harsh elements. Each day began with Chester taking the first watch at dawn, his eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of rescue. The early morning light brought a fleeting sense of hope, and Chester used this time to rally the group. "Keep your eyes peeled," he would say, his voice calm and steady. "We're still in this together." After the morning watch, the survivors would gather for their daily rationing. Chester led this process, ensuring that every drop of water and crumb of hardtack was carefully measured out. They had to make their supplies last as long as possible, and Chester's meticulous approach helped prevent arguments over dwindling resources. "One sip at a time," he would remind them. "We'll make it through." Sam, the ship's cook, took charge of the fishing. Each day, he would cast the lines, hoping to catch enough to supplement their diet. Chester often helped, his presence providing support and encouragement. Fishing was a slow and often fruitless endeavor, but Chester's positive attitude helped maintain a semblance of optimism. "We'll catch something today. I know it," he would say, even when the catch was slim. The heat of the day was oppressive, and the lifeboat became an unbearable oven under the relentless sun. To conserve energy, the survivors would huddle in the shade of the boat's canopy or under makeshift covers fashioned from scraps. Chester organized rest periods, ensuring that everyone had time to recover from the heat and fatigue. "Rest up now," he would say. "We need all our strength." Evenings were marked by a ritual of reflection and camaraderie. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the water, Chester would gather the survivors and share stories, memories of their lives before the shipwreck. His storytelling became a nightly ritual, a way to distract and comfort his shipmates. He spoke of his hometown, his family, and the little things that made life worth living. These stories, though bittersweet, helped keep their spirits up. Chester's calming presence was a beacon of hope in the midst of their dire situation. He maintained a sense of order and routine that helped counteract the chaos of their circumstances. Whenever tensions flared or despair threatened to take hold, Chester was there to offer words of encouragement and practical solutions. "We're in this together," he would remind them, "Every challenge we overcome makes us stronger." At night, the lifeboat became a small, tight-knit community. The survivors huddled together for warmth, their bodies close to stave off the cold. Chester would ensure that everyone was settled and comfortable, offering reassuring words and a steady hand. Despite the ever-present fear and uncertainty, Chester's leadership and empathy provided a sense of stability. The days blended together, each one marked by the same struggles and small victories. The lifeboat became a place of endurance and hope, a testament to the resilience of its occupants. Chester's role as a calming presence was crucial, helping to maintain morale and keep the group focused on their ultimate goal: survival and rescue. As the days turned into weeks, Chester and the survivors continued to cling to hope. Each sunrise was a reminder that they were still alive, and each small success a catch of fish, a well-rationed meal, became a victory in their fight against the odds. Chester's unwavering determination and compassion provided a light in the darkness, a reminder that even in the most challenging of circumstances, human spirit and solidarity could prevail. Their daily life on the raft was a continuous test of endurance and strength, but with Chester's guidance, they found ways to adapt, persevere, and maintain the hope that someday, they would be rescued and reunited with the world they had once known. Weeks had passed since the survivors of the USS Anderson had been adrift in the lifeboat. The initial shock and routine of survival had given way to a grueling test of endurance. The once manageable challenges of their situation had escalated into a series of relentless trials. The vast Pacific, once a seemingly endless stretch of hope, had become an unforgiving expanse of hardship. The sun blazed mercilessly during the day, turning the lifeboat into a sweltering furnace. The survivors' skin was scorched, and their lips were cracked from dehydration. Despite their careful rationing, the limited supply of water did little to quench their thirst. The relentless heat made every moment on the lifeboat feel like a trial of endurance. Nights, by contrast, were bitterly cold. The temperature dropped sharply, and the survivors huddled together for warmth, their breaths visible in the frigid air. The lifeboat, though small, seemed to shrink even further as they tried to find some comfort amidst the cold. The constant cycle of extreme heat and cold took a toll on their physical and mental well-being. Their plight was further compounded by the frequent storms that swept across the ocean. Torrential rain, howling winds, and towering waves battered the lifeboat, drenching the survivors and making their already difficult existence even more precarious. During these storms, the lifeboat would pitch and toss violently, leaving the survivors clinging to its sides in a desperate attempt to stay aboard. One night, a particularly fierce storm rolled in, and the lifeboat was tossed about like a toy. The rain fell in sheets, and the wind howled as if it were trying to tear the boat apart. Chester, drenched and shivering, struggled to keep the lifeboat steady, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. "Hold on," Chester shouted, his words almost lost in the cacophony of the storm. "We'll get through this." As the storm raged on, the survivors clung to each other, their fear and despair palpable. The intensity of the weather, combined with their dwindling supplies, left them feeling increasingly vulnerable. When the storm finally subsided, the survivors were left exhausted, their spirits battered by the relentless onslaught. Their trials were not limited to the weather. The vast ocean was home to other threats as well. Sharks began to circle the lifeboat, drawn by the scent of their meager fish catch. The predators' ominous fins cutting through the water added to their growing sense of dread. The survivors were on constant alert, their nerves frayed by the ever-present danger. The physical and emotional strain of their ordeal began to show. The constant exposure to the elements, combined with the inadequate rations and the ever-present threat of storms, started to erode the group's morale. Arguments broke out over trivial matters, and the strain of their situation began to manifest in tension and despair. One evening, as the sun set and the temperature dropped, a heated argument erupted between Billy and Sam. Billy, exhausted and on edge, lashed out at Sam over the fishing efforts, accusing him of not trying hard enough. The argument quickly escalated, with harsh words exchanged and the group's unity threatened by the rising tempers. Chester intervened, his own exhaustion evident in the lines of his face. "We can't afford to fight among ourselves," he said firmly, though his voice was weary. "We need to work together if we're going to survive this." His words, though sincere, did little to quell the growing despair. Some of the survivors began to lose hope, their eyes reflecting a sense of resignation and defeat. They had endured so much, but the seemingly endless days and nights, combined with the unyielding ocean, began to take a psychological toll. Chester, despite his own dwindling energy, made a conscious effort to maintain a sense of hope. He would gather the group during the evenings, sharing stories and encouraging them to focus on the positives, however small. His attempts to lift their spirits were met with mixed reactions. Some listened with quiet hope, while others remained distant and despondent. Each small victory, a successful fishing trip, a brief period of calm weather, became a moment of solace amidst the relentless struggle. Chester continued to lead with a steady resolve, striving to keep the survivors focused and united in their fight for survival. As the days dragged on, the challenges they faced only seemed to multiply. The ocean's harsh conditions, the ever-present threats, and the internal strain of their prolonged ordeal all contributed to a growing sense of despair. Yet, amidst the darkness and struggle, Chester's unwavering determination and compassion remained a beacon of hope for the survivors. The lifeboat was a small vessel in a vast, indifferent sea, but Chester's leadership and the shared will to survive kept the group together. In the face of mounting challenges and deepening despair, they clung to the hope that, against all odds, rescue would come, and they would find their way back to safety. As the weeks dragged on, the lifeboat's occupants became more attuned to the challenges of their harsh environment. Chester Bennington and the survivors faced a new reality. They had to adapt or perish. Resourcefulness became their most vital asset, as they sought ways to stretch their dwindling supplies and cope with the relentless demands of survival. One morning, after another sleepless night and a sparse breakfast of hardtack, Chester gathered the group. The sun was already blazing, and the heat was almost unbearable. "We need to get creative with our resources," Chester said, his voice firm despite the fatigue in his eyes. "If we're going to make it, we have to adapt to what we have." With Chester's encouragement, the survivors set to work on improving their survival strategies. Sam, the cook, took charge of making the most of their limited fishing kit. He fashioned new hooks and lines from scraps of metal and string, using pieces of the lifeboat and any available materials. The process was painstaking, but it yielded better results than their previous attempts. With each small success, the group's morale received a modest boost. Chester also turned his attention to collecting rainwater, a vital resource for their survival. He repurposed pieces of the lifeboat's tarps and clothing to create makeshift collection systems. When it rained, they spread out the tarps to catch as much water as possible, funneling it into salvaged containers. The sight of the first collected water was a welcome relief, bringing a sense of accomplishment and a glimmer of hope. The survivors learned to make the most of their catches, no matter how small. Each fish, though often tiny, was carefully cleaned and divided. Chester implemented a rotation system for rationing, ensuring that everyone received a fair share. The nutritional value of the fish, while minimal, was a crucial supplement to their diet. The lifeboat itself became a site of innovation. Chester and the others used scraps of wood and metal from the wreckage to reinforce the boat and repair any damage. They fashioned improvised sails and paddles from whatever materials they could find, making their tiny vessel more resilient to the elements. In addition to their practical adaptations, Chester worked on maintaining the group's mental resilience. Every evening, he led discussions on their progress and encouraged everyone to share their thoughts and ideas. This open communication helped to alleviate some of the stress and foster a sense of camaraderie. The nights remained cold and uncomfortable, but Chester found ways to help the group cope. He and the others used the lifeboat's remaining materials to create makeshift blankets and insulating layers, using everything at their disposal to fend off the cold. They huddled together for warmth, and Chester would often tell stories or lead sing-alongs to keep their spirits up. Despite their efforts, the survivors' bodies began to show signs of the prolonged strain. Weight loss and exhaustion became evident, and Chester could see the weariness in their eyes. Yet, the small victories, the successful fishing trips, the accumulated rainwater, the repaired lifeboat provided a crucial morale boost. Each accomplishment, no matter how minor, was a testament to their resilience and ingenuity. Chester's leadership remained a steady influence, guiding the group through the trials they faced. His resourcefulness and determination helped the survivors navigate their harsh reality with as much grace as possible. The lifeboat, though battered and worn, was a testament to their collective effort and ingenuity. As the days continued to pass, the survivors grew increasingly adept at navigating their environment. They became more skilled at fishing and water collection, and their resourcefulness allowed them to stretch their supplies further than they had imagined possible. Chester's unwavering resolve and the group's collective effort transformed their dire situation into a testament to human perseverance. The vast ocean remained a constant, but within the lifeboat, the survivors found a way to adapt and survive. Their resourcefulness was their greatest ally, helping them to face each new challenge with a spirit of determination and hope. With Chester's guidance, they continued to navigate the trials of their ordeal, holding onto the belief that, despite the adversity, they would ultimately find their way to safety. The endless stretch of the Pacific Ocean, both vast and unforgiving, was a constant reminder of the survivors' isolation. Yet, amidst the bleakness of their situation, moments of hope occasionally pierced through the monotony of their days. These fleeting glimpses of potential rescue brought both elation and heartache, as each sighting was followed by the crushing realization of their continued plight. One sweltering afternoon, as Chester Bennington and the survivors huddled in the shade of the lifeboat's makeshift canopy, a distant speck on the horizon caught their attention. The group, worn and weary from weeks at sea, squinted against the glaring sun, their hearts racing with sudden excitement. "Look," shouted Sam, pointing towards the distant shape. "It's a ship." The survivors scrambled to their feet, their faces alight with renewed hope. Chester quickly grabbed the distress signals they had crafted, a tattered flag fashioned from remnants of their clothing and a makeshift flare made from a piece of metal. He waved the flag frantically, while another survivor lit the flare, sending a plume of smoke and a burst of light into the sky. For what seemed like an eternity, they watched as the ship grew larger on the horizon. The survivors' hearts beat with a mixture of hope and fear, their eyes fixed on the approaching vessel. Chester, his voice strained with anticipation, kept up the signal, desperately trying to catch the ship's attention. But as the ship drew nearer, it became evident that it had not seen them. The distant vessel continued its course, oblivious to the tiny lifeboat adrift beneath it. The survivors watched in dismay as the ship sailed past, their hopes sinking with it. The flare's smoke dissipated, leaving them once again in the oppressive silence of the ocean. The atmosphere in the lifeboat grew heavy with despair. Chester's shoulders slumped, his earlier optimism replaced by a profound sense of loss. He sat quietly, his gaze fixed on the horizon, as the other survivors murmured in frustration and disappointment. The sight of the ship, so tantalizingly close, had only served to underscore their isolation. The next few days were marked by a return to their grim routine. Their spirits were visibly dampened, and the daily tasks of fishing and water collection seemed even more burdensome. Chester worked to maintain the group's morale, but the recent sighting had left a deep emotional scar. Then, on a misty morning, as the survivors huddled together for warmth, a different type of hope appeared. Chester spotted the faint outline of an aircraft high above them. The group immediately sprang into action, preparing another flare and waving their makeshift distress signal with renewed vigor. The aircraft, a small plane, flew over them several times. Chester and the others waved and shouted, their voices carrying as best they could. The plane circled above, its shadow momentarily shading the lifeboat. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the aircraft might spot them, but as the plane ascended and disappeared into the distance, the survivors were left with the painful realization that they had once again been overlooked. The cycle of hope and despair became a cruel routine. Each sighting of a potential rescuer, a ship on the horizon, an aircraft overhead, was followed by the crushing realization of their continued abandonment. The survivors clung to the faint hope that each new sighting might be their salvation, only to be left feeling more isolated with each failed attempt. Chester, despite his own growing weariness, continued to support the group with unwavering resolve. He reminded them that every sighting, though it might not have resulted in rescue, was a sign that help was out there somewhere. "We've been seen," he said during one particularly somber evening. "That means we're not completely alone. We just need to hold on a little longer." The moments of hope, though fleeting and often followed by despair, became a driving force for Chester and the survivors. They provided brief, shimmering glimpses of the possibility of rescue and the reminder that their struggle was not entirely in vain. Despite the emotional toll of their ordeal, these moments helped to sustain their will to survive, as they continued to wait for the day when they would finally be rescued from the relentless ocean. After 133 grueling days adrift in the unforgiving expanse of the Pacific Ocean, the survivors of the lifeboat were pushed to the brink of their endurance. The relentless exposure to the elements, the constant struggle for food and water, and the emotional toll of their prolonged ordeal had left them physically and mentally exhausted. The lifeboat, once a symbol of hope and survival, had become a stark testament to their suffering. The survivors' once vibrant spirits had diminished into shadows of their former selves. Each day was a battle against hunger, dehydration, and fatigue. Their bodies, weakened by starvation and the harsh conditions, bore the visible signs of their struggle. Chester Bennington, though still a pillar of strength for the group, felt the weight of their dire situation more acutely than ever. The relentless sun continued to scorch their skin, turning their once healthy bodies into parched, sunburned shells. The biting cold of the nights was becoming unbearable, leaving their weakened frames shivering uncontrollably. The small amount of water they had managed to collect was barely enough to sustain them, and the fishing efforts had yielded diminishing returns. The emotional strain was equally severe. The survivors, once a close-knit group, were now fraught with despair and resignation. The hope that had sustained them through the early days had become a distant memory, replaced by a pervasive sense of defeat. The lifeboat was filled with the echoes of their exhaustion and the quiet despair of their fading hope. One morning, as Chester scanned the horizon with the same weary hopefulness, he noticed a somber change in the group. James, one of the younger survivors, had grown increasingly listless. His once bright eyes were now sunken, and his energy had all but evaporated. Chester, his own strength waning, approached James with a mixture of concern and sorrow. "How are you holding up, James?" Chester asked, his voice gentle but strained. James looked up, his expression a mixture of resignation and pain. "I'm tired, Chester," he replied quietly. "I don't think I can go on much longer." Chester placed a reassuring hand on James's shoulder, but the words of comfort felt hollow in the face of their grim reality. He knew that James was not alone in his suffering. The toll of their prolonged ordeal was taking its toll on everyone. As days turned into weeks, Chester witnessed the gradual decline of his fellow survivors, their bodies and spirits failing under the relentless pressure. The lifeboat's atmosphere grew increasingly somber. The survivors' conversations, once filled with hope and camaraderie, had become sparse and disheartened. The group struggled to find solace in their daily routines, and the once vital tasks of fishing and water collection became arduous chores. The sense of unity that had once bonded them began to fray, replaced by a silent resignation to their fate. Tragically, the physical toll claimed its first victim. Michael, one of the older survivors, succumbed to the harsh conditions. His body, already weakened by months of starvation and dehydration, could no longer withstand the strain. His passing was a devastating blow to the group, casting a pall of grief over the lifeboat. Chester, despite his own exhaustion, took on the role of providing solace and support to the grieving survivors. In the days that followed, the survivors faced a stark reality. The dwindling numbers and the growing sense of hopelessness made it increasingly difficult to maintain their will to survive. Chester continued to lead with the stoic determination, trying to keep the group focused on the slim possibility of rescue. But even his resolve was tested by the mounting despair. One evening, as the sun set on another grueling day, Chester gathered the remaining survivors. His voice, though strained, carried a note of resolve. "We've come so far," he said, his gaze sweeping over the haggard faces of his fellow survivors. "We can't give up now. We have to hold on, for ourselves and for those we've lost." Despite his efforts, the physical and mental toll of their ordeal remained overwhelming. The lifeboat was a somber place, a stark reminder of their isolation and suffering. Chester's leadership, though unwavering, could not fully mitigate the harsh reality of their situation. The survivors clung to the fragile hope that rescue might still come, even as their strength waned and their spirits faltered. As the days dragged on, the survivors faced the sobering truth of their situation. The harsh conditions, the loss of their fellow survivors, and the unrelenting nature of their ordeal had pushed them to the brink. Yet, through it all, Chester's enduring resolve and the shared will to survive continued to provide a glimmer of hope amidst the overwhelming darkness. The survivors had grown numb to the passage of time, their days blending into a monotonous blur of pain and despair. Chester Bennington, though weakened by the ordeal, maintained a sliver of hope as he guided the exhausted group. The lifeboat, now a fragile shell of its former self, was barely holding together under the relentless pressure of the sea. Each day, Chester would scan the horizon with a tired gaze, searching for any sign of salvation. The sun was setting on what felt like another unremarkable day. The survivors, huddled together for warmth, were barely holding on. Chester, his once vibrant eyes now dimmed by exhaustion, leaned against the edge of the lifeboat, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger and the cold that seeped into his bones. His thoughts were a jumble of resignation and a desperate plea for the end of their suffering. Just as hope seemed all but extinguished, a distant sound pierced through the despair. It was a faint but unmistakable hum, the sound of an engine. Chester's heart leaped, though he struggled to believe it. He strained his eyes against the setting sun, hoping against hope that it wasn't a mirage. "Everyone, look." Chester's voice was hoarse, but filled with a renewed urgency. "I think I hear something." The survivors, too weak to move quickly, lifted their heads with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Chester managed to pull himself upright, his legs trembling beneath him. The hum grew louder, and through the fading light, he spotted a shadow on the horizon, a ship, moving steadily towards them. A rush of adrenaline surged through Chester's veins. He grabbed the remaining flare and ignited it, its bright flame slicing through the encroaching darkness. The flare's light cast a brief, hopeful glow over the lifeboat, and Chester waved it frantically, his movements fueled by a mixture of desperation and hope. The ship continued its approach, seemingly drawn to the distress signal. As it neared, the survivors' weak cries for help reached the crew. Chester, despite his own near exhaustion, managed to keep up the signal, his voice hoarse but unwavering. The ship, a large freighter, came into clearer view. Its lights illuminated the lifeboat and its weary occupants. Chester watched as the ship slowed its approach, and a rescue team was lowered into the water. The sight of the crew's determined faces brought tears of relief to Chester's eyes. Minutes felt like hours as the rescue team reached the lifeboat. They worked quickly but carefully, helping the survivors into the safety of the rescue boats. Chester, despite his weakened state, was assisted with gentle but firm hands. The lifeboat, which had been their prison for so long, was finally abandoned as they were lifted onto the ship. The survivors were taken aboard, wrapped in warm blankets, and given food and water. Chester, though barely able to stand, felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and relief as he was finally brought into the ship's interior. The warmth and comfort of the ship were a stark contrast to the harsh conditions they had endured for so long. The rescue team attended to their immediate needs, providing medical care and nourishment. Chester, as he recovered, looked around at the faces of his fellow survivors, faces etched with the same mixture of relief and disbelief that he felt. They had made it. Against all odds, they had been saved. The ship set sail, heading towards safety and recovery. Chester, though still weak, took solace in the fact that their nightmare was finally coming to an end. He watched the Pacific Ocean recede behind them, the vast expanse of water now a distant memory. As the days passed and the survivors regained their strength, Chester reflected on their ordeal with a profound sense of gratitude. The miracle of their rescue had not only saved their lives, but had also rekindled their hope in the face of overwhelming adversity. Chester's unwavering resilience and the collective strength of the survivors had carried them through the darkest of times, leading to a miraculous end to their harrowing journey. After their harrowing ordeal at sea, Chester Bennington and the survivors were finally back on solid ground. The freighter that had rescued them docked at a port where they were met with a mix of astonishment, relief, and jubilation. The transition from the vast emptiness of the ocean to the bustling energy of the port was overwhelming for the survivors, their senses bombarded by the sights, sounds, and smells of civilization. Chester and his fellow survivors were greeted with an outpouring of support from both the military and the local community. News of their dramatic rescue had spread, and they were welcomed as heroes. As they disembarked, they were greeted by crowds of well-wishers, reporters, and officials eager to hear their story. The initial days back on land were a whirlwind of activity. Chester and the others were given medical attention, their physical and emotional wounds treated by professionals who had been waiting for them. They underwent extensive evaluations to address the malnutrition, dehydration, and trauma they had endured. Despite the professional care, the process of healing was slow and challenging. The survivors faced a difficult adjustment as they grappled with their new reality. Chester, though grateful to be home, found himself struggling with the sense of disorientation. The noise, the people, and the sheer volume of activities felt overwhelming. After months of isolation and silence at sea, he experienced a profound sense of displacement, as if he was caught between two worlds: the stark, unrelenting ocean, and the vibrant, chaotic reality of life on land. In the quiet moments, Chester often found himself reflecting on the ordeal. The trauma of their experience weighed heavily on his mind. Memories of their struggle, the loss of their companions, and the relentless struggle for survival were difficult to reconcile with the newfound normalcy of life at home. Chester sought solace in talking to fellow survivors who shared his sense of dislocation, finding comfort in their shared experience. The media coverage surrounding their return was extensive. Chester and his fellow survivors were interviewed by reporters and featured in news stories across the nation. Their bravery and endurance were highlighted, and they were celebrated for their remarkable survival against the odds. The public's response was one of admiration and respect, recognizing the incredible resilience and fortitude required to endure such an ordeal. Despite the accolades and recognition, Chester remained grounded. He took part in ceremonies and interviews, but found solace in quieter moments spent with family and friends. The support from loved ones was a crucial part of his recovery. They provided a sense of normalcy and connection, helping him reintegrate into his life after such a prolonged absence. Over time, Chester and the survivors began to find their footing. They sought professional help to address the psychological impact of their experience, engaging in therapy and support groups to process their trauma and adjust to their new reality. The process of healing was ongoing, but Chester approached it with the same determination that had carried him through their ordeal at sea. As the months passed, Chester found ways to channel his experience into positive actions. He became an advocate for mental health awareness, using his platform to speak about the importance of seeking help and supporting others who had experienced trauma. His story of survival and resilience inspired many, and he dedicated himself to helping others navigate their own challenges. Chester's return to civilization marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. He remained deeply affected by his ordeal, but he also emerged from it with a renewed sense of purpose. The heroism that the public celebrated was matched by his own inner strength and resilience, qualities that would continue to guide him as he rebuilt his life and sought to make a meaningful impact in the world. The journey from the ocean's depths to the embrace of civilization was a profound transformation for Chester and the survivors. They had endured the unimaginable and emerged not only as heroes but as symbols of human endurance and hope. Their return to life on land was marked by both the challenges of adjustment and the triumph of their survival, a testament to their remarkable strength and the unbreakable spirit that had carried them through their darkest hours. As the sun set on a tranquil evening, casting a warm golden hue over the serene landscape, Chester Bennington sat on the porch of his modest home, gazing out at the distant horizon. The gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees around him, a comforting contrast to the harsh winds he had endured at sea. The tranquility of his surroundings was a far cry from the relentless expanse of the Pacific Ocean where he had spent so many harrowing days. Chester's mind wandered back to the ordeal he and his fellow survivors had faced. The memory of the endless days at sea, the desperation, and the fleeting moments of hope felt both vivid and distant. He took a deep breath, trying to reconcile the profound experiences of his past with the calm of his present. In the solitude of his reflections, Chester found himself grappling with the lessons learned from his journey. He remembered the camaraderie that had sustained him and the profound sense of isolation that had tested his resolve. The experience had stripped away the complexities of life, revealing the raw essence of human endurance and vulnerability. One of the most enduring lessons Chester had learned was the remarkable strength of the human spirit. The resilience he and his fellow survivors had exhibited in the face of unimaginable adversity was a testament to the unyielding will to survive. Each member of the group had faced their darkest fears and deepest pain, yet they had managed to cling to hope, even when it seemed all but lost. Chester reflected on the moments of despair that had tested their resolve, the storms that battered their makeshift raft, the relentless hunger and thirst, and the loss of their companions. Each challenge had pushed them to their limits, but it had also revealed the extraordinary capacity for courage and determination within them. The experience had also taught Chester about the importance of solidarity and support. In their darkest hours, the survivors had relied on each other for strength. Chester had learned that even in the most dire circumstances, the presence of others and the act of helping one another could provide a glimmer of hope and a reason to continue. As he sat in the quiet of the evening, Chester thought about the people who had supported him and the others after their rescue. The outpouring of care and the recognition they received had been a reminder of the kindness and compassion that existed in the world. It had been a powerful affirmation of the connection between individuals, even after enduring such profound hardship. Chester's reflections also touched on the broader implications of their experience. He pondered the ways in which adversity could reshape one's perspective on life. The ordeal had forced him to confront his own vulnerabilities and to appreciate the simple yet profound aspects of existence. It had deepened his understanding of the value of life and the importance of cherishing every moment. The sense of closure Chester felt was bittersweet. The ordeal had left scars, both visible and invisible, but it had also fostered a deep sense of gratitude and humility. He knew that the path to healing and understanding would be ongoing, but he faced it with a newfound resolve. The strength he had discovered within himself and the lessons he had learned would continue to guide him in the years to come. As the sky darkened and the first stars began to twinkle above, Chester took a final look at the horizon. The vastness of the ocean, though now a distant memory, was forever etched in his heart. It was a reminder of the journey he had endured and the indomitable spirit that had carried him through. The experience had been a profound test of endurance and a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. Chester stood up, feeling a sense of peace and acceptance. The journey from the depths of the ocean to the calm of his home had been a remarkable one, filled with trials and triumphs. As he turned to go inside, he carried with him a deep appreciation for life and a profound respect for the strength and resilience that defined the human spirit. As the years passed since the harrowing days at sea, Chester Bennington found himself reflecting on how profoundly his experience had shaped his life. The ordeal had been a crucible that tested his endurance and resilience, leaving an indelible mark on his soul. It had not only transformed him personally, but had also inspired many others with his remarkable story of survival and hope. Chester's journey of recovery and reintegration into civilian life was both challenging and transformative. The trauma of his ordeal had left its scars, but it had also bestowed upon him a deeper understanding of life and a renewed sense of purpose. As he navigated the complexities of reintegrating into society, Chester discovered that his experience had given him a unique perspective, one that he was determined to share with others. He began speaking at events in schools, sharing his story of survival with audiences eager to hear about his extraordinary journey. Chester's talks were more than just recounting the events of those 133 days. They were about the lessons he had learned and the resilience he had found within himself. He spoke candidly about the struggles he had faced, the losses he had endured, and the strength that had carried him through. His vulnerability and honesty resonated deeply with his listeners, who found solace and inspiration in his words. Chester's story became a beacon of hope for many. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit has the power to overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. His experiences underscored the importance of hope, perseverance, and the strength of community. People from various walks of life reached out to him, sharing how his story had given them the courage to face their own struggles. In addition to his speaking engagements, Chester became involved in advocacy work for mental health and support for survivors of trauma. He used his platform to raise awareness about the psychological impact of extreme experiences and the importance of seeking help. Chester partnered with organizations dedicated to mental health support, helping to provide resources and counseling for those in need. His efforts were driven by a genuine desire to make a difference and to help others find the same strength and hope that had guided him through his darkest hours. Chester's personal life also reflected the lasting impact of his ordeal. He had learned to appreciate the small joys and simple moments that he had once taken for granted. The relationships he had with family and friends grew stronger as he valued the connections he had made. The lessons of resilience and gratitude continued to guide him, shaping his approach to life and his interactions with others. The legacy of Chester's experience extended beyond his own life. His story became a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the capacity to overcome adversity. It inspired books, documentaries, and countless personal testimonies from those who had been touched by his journey. His tale of survival and recovery served as a source of strength for many, illustrating the enduring impact of his courage and determination. As Chester looked back on his life, he saw a path marked by trials and triumphs. The experiences of those 133 days at sea had become a defining chapter in his life, one that had shaped his values, his purpose, and his outlook on the world. His journey from the depths of the ocean to the heights of inspiration had been remarkable, and he remained committed to sharing his story and supporting others. Chester's life was a testament to the profound impact that an extraordinary experience can have on a person. His story of survival and resilience continued to inspire, offering a beacon of hope and a reminder of the strength that lies within us all. In the end, Chester's experience had not only changed his life, but had also left an enduring legacy that would continue to touch and inspire others for years to come. In the quiet moments of reflection, as the echoes of his past adventures softly blend into the present, Chester Bennington finds himself pondering the essence of his journey. The trials he endured, the battles he fought, and the survival against all odds have woven a tapestry of experiences that speak to the profound resilience of the human spirit. His story, marked by the ceaseless struggle for survival and the triumph of hope over despair, serves as a powerful testament to the strength within each of us. It is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, when the path seems shrouded in uncertainty, and the weight of adversity feels insurmountable, there is a glimmer of hope that can guide us through. Chester's ordeal at sea was not just a test of physical endurance, but a profound journey into the depths of the human psyche. The endless days of dreams, the struggles against the elements, and the haunting specter of isolation were all part of a greater narrative, a narrative that reveals the true power of resilience. In the face of relentless challenges, it was hope that became the beacon, lighting the way forward. Hope, Chester learned, is not merely a passive wish, but an active force that propels us through adversity. It is the quiet strength that whispers in the darkest hours, urging us to hold on, to fight, and to believe in the possibility of a brighter future. It is the force that binds us together, that fosters unity, and that fuels the will to survive, even when the odds seem insurmountable. The human spirit, as Chester discovered, is remarkable in its capacity to endure. It can be battered and tested, but it remains unbroken, often revealing a strength and courage that surpasses our expectations. This resilience is not just about surviving the physical trials, but about finding meaning and purpose in the midst of hardship. It is about discovering the depth of our inner strength and the ability to rise again, even when we feel we have nothing left to give. Chester's story, with all its highs and lows, serves as an enduring reminder of the power of hope and resilience, It is a call to embrace the strength within ourselves and to support one another through the challenges we face. It is a testament to the fact that, even when we are pushed to our limits, the human spirit has an incredible capacity to adapt, to recover, and to inspire. As Chester looks back on his journey, he is filled with a profound sense of gratitude. The ordeal that once seemed like an insurmountable trial has become a source of inspiration and a testament to the strength of the human spirit. The lessons learned and the hope that sustained him are gifts that he now shares with others, hoping to ignite the same sense of resilience in those who may be facing their own struggles. In the final moments of reflection, Chester's message is clear. No matter how dark the times may seem, no matter how challenging the journey, hope is a powerful ally. It is the spark that lights our way, the strength that carries us through, and the force that enables us to overcome the greatest of obstacles. The resilience of the human spirit is boundless, and within it lies the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Embrace hope, cherish the strength within you, and never underestimate the power of the human spirit to rise above adversity. For it is in the darkest times that we discover the true depth of our resilience and the unwavering light of hope that guides us through.